She keeps him around like a rescue dog. That's what I heard, word for word, right as I was swallowing my last sip of that syrupy, sparkling cider they passed around like champagne for the peasants. I was standing behind a column, off to the side where they'd forgotten to put heaters, cold wind brushing the back of my neck, shoes just slightly too polished for this crowd of shark-grinned 20 and 30-somethings in tailored suits. Marla was at the center of it all, tall, poised, radiant in a black jumpsuit that probably cost more than my first car, and she was laughing at me. "Please," and she said between sips of real champagne, "I can drop him any time. He's useless." I didn't drop my glass. I placed it on the ledge next to a potted plant someone had knocked half the soil out of. I didn't storm out or make a scene. That would have been emotional. And if there's one thing Marla taught me over the years, it's that showing emotion makes you weak, which is funny, considering the panic I saw on her face later. Anyway, I stepped through the rooftop doors, past a young guy who gave me that half smirk people save for parking attendants and Uber drivers. My fingers found the inside pocket of my coat, where my phone sat like a weapon I hadn't drawn in years. I thumbed it open. One number. No hesitation. "Hey," I said calmly. "It's time." I stood on the sidewalk outside, looking up at the warm glow of rooftop string lights. Inside, they were still clinking glasses, still calling her brilliant, still laughing at the woman who had clawed her way to the top on a ladder I built. Every rung of it. People think revenge is dramatic, explosive, yelling, crying, final straws, shattering plates. But that's television. Real revenge is cold, surgical. You prep for it like a surgeon preps for a transplant. Steady hands, clean tools, no wasted motion. And you don't do it alone. By the way, if you've made it this far and you're not subscribed, do it. More than 97% of people listen without subscribing, and it makes it harder for the team to keep building stories like this. A quick tap goes a long way. Trust me, I know how quiet support systems matter. But back to Marla. Let's get one thing clear. I'm not some bitter, washed-up husband grasping for control. I'm not angry she succeeded. Hell, I built half the infrastructure that made her success possible. What burned wasn't that she took the credit. It was that she rewrote the history of it, made me a footnote in her origin story, then invited the whole firm to laugh about it with her. She keeps him around like a rescue dog. That phrase stuck in my head, the way smoke sticks to fabric. Clings, lingers. That's what made me pick up the phone, not the words, really, but the tone, that confident cruelty, that ease like she'd said it before. And she had. I remembered the other times, subtler moments, when we'd host dinners and she'd interrupt me halfway through a story to correct a detail no one cared about. The time her friend asked how we met and she said, "He was just there." Or when her intern asked if her husband had any hobbies and she said, "Probably, I don't ask." It hadn't always been like that. There was a time when she looked at me like I hung the damn moon, when she was an assistant in that gray-brown cubicle on the 8th floor of Mitchell, Rayner and Bexley, hunched over a paralegal's desk, retyping briefs after hours, and I'd bring her coffee and rub the back of her neck. We used to dream out loud about a firm she'd one day lead, about our house upstate, about not having to hustle forever. What she never asked was who introduced her to Daniel, the managing partner at her firm now. She never connected that the lease she signed for her first private office, that the landlord was one of my clients, that the back-end software she uses to build clients, TrackFlow Pro, isn't just some startup but a company I own 41% of under an LLC with a name she never thought to Google. She never asked because she never really looked. And tonight, she'd gone too far. I was halfway down the block when the man on the other end of the call said, "Where is she right now?" "Still on the roof," I said. "Drunk on power." There was a pause, then a chuckle. "Give me 20 minutes. I hung up, slid the phone back into my coat pocket, turned the corner and walked toward the parking garage where my quiet 10-year-old black sedan sat waiting. My breath came out in visible puffs as I walked, steady, focused, and beneath all that calm, a flicker of something sharper. Not rage, not vengeance. A reminder that even rescue dogs remember who fed them and who let them starve. The waterfront was empty, save for a few gulls tearing at a bag of fast food near the pier lights. I parked facing the water, headlights off, engine still warm. The party was already 2 exits behind me, but Marla's voice still played in my head like a looped voicemail. I can drop him anytime, he's useless. Funny thing about being the useless husband, nobody suspects you've still got the wires to flip the main breaker. My phone buzzed once in my palm, signal strong. I hit the contact labeled only D. It rang twice before the click. Elliot, came the voice, clipped and familiar. Daniel, I said. Need a favor. There was a pause on his end, not of hesitation, just curiosity. Whatever it is, he said, she earned it. I told him, just the basics. Her comments, the tone, the exact words. He didn't ask for context, didn't challenge it, just listened. When I finished, there was silence. Then, where is she right now? Still on the rooftop, drunk on power. He laughed, just once. Give me 20 minutes. I hung up, dropped the phone into the center console, and stared out at the water. The tide was low, and the rocks below the pier looked like the spine of some old beast waiting to rise. My hands stayed still on the wheel, no tremble, no sweat, just silence and something ancient in my chest beginning to stretch its limbs. Daniel wasn't just her boss, he was the quiet shareholder who bankrolled the firm's expansion when they made the push to go national. The type of investor who doesn't show up on org charts but gets invited to every off-book strategy session. I introduced them over bourbon in my study 7 years ago. Marla was still a junior associate then, full of ambition, and 2 years into asking when I'd finally put her on something that mattered. She thought I was just humoring her, thought Daniel's interest in her business plan was flattery. What she didn't realize was that Daniel didn't do charity. He backed potential with infrastructure, and he backed it only when I asked. Now, he owed me 3 favors. This would be the first. And Marla, she forgot who connected the wires in her power grid, forgot that silent doesn't mean absent. The streetlight above flickered, casting the dashboard in rhythmic pulses. I opened the glove box, slid out a worn leather folio. Inside were papers I hadn't touched in a decade, drafts of incorporation agreements, founder share breakdowns, license agreements. She'd never seen them because she'd never bothered to ask what I did all day. Her world wasn't built without me. It was built around me. Daniel once told me something during a bourbon-fueled post-mortem after they closed their 3rd acquisition. You're the rare kind of man who builds an empire and doesn't need a crown. I remember smiling. I'd always liked that. Now I finally understood what it was for. I pulled out a pen from the center console, clicked it once, and marked an old envelope with a single note, D, full green light, just in case I needed to push more than one domino tonight. Marla called me useless, a rescue dog. Like I was some patched up mutt she let stay out of pity, but here's what they don't tell you about rescue dogs. Some of them used to be wolves. They just learned how to wait. My phone buzzed again. Elliot, Daniel said. I just left the parking garage. I'm heading upstairs. No blowback to the board, I said. You keep it clean. Of course. I'll stay out of it, I added. Let her try to explain it without me in the room. Elegant, he said. Cruel, but elegant. I hung up again, this time slower, watched as a single boat out on the water shifted with the current, its light blinking every few seconds like a heartbeat. Back when we first got married, Marla told me her biggest fear wasn't failure. It was irrelevance. Not being noticed, being background noise. At the time, I thought it was a moment of vulnerability. I tried to comfort her. Now, I realize that's exactly how she saw me. Background noise, a quiet hum in the machinery of her life. Invisible until it stops. And everything goes dark. Tonight, Daniel would walk into her party, and things would begin to flicker. Not explode, not yet, but flicker. Enough to draw attention. Enough to make the spotlight flicker sideways, just for a second, onto something she never thought could talk back. I stayed in the car a while longer, let the engine cool, watched the tide roll in slow, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was holding my breath. I'd already pulled the lever, and now I waited to hear the snap. The garage light flicked on automatically when I stepped through the side door, but I didn't stop there. I walked past the old snow shovels, the untouched kayak, the box of Christmas lights we hadn't put up in 3 years, straight through to the interior door and into the hallway, down to the study, my sanctuary, my vault, my crime scene, depending on how you look at it. The study smelled like leather and dust and the faintest hint of printer toner. The bookshelves were exactly as I'd left them, lined with first editions, not for show, but because I actually read. Center shelf, waist level, left side. That's where the files lived, not locked, not hidden, just placed where no one curious enough ever dared to look. I pulled down a slim black binder first, logo on the corner, Halston Development. That was the shell company we used to purchase the firm's satellite office in Charleston. Marla had made a whole speech about how the firm was expanding independently. Pity no one checked the deed. Next was the lease agreement for her main office downtown. Signed by her, but the guarantor, a 3-letter LLC she thought belonged to the property manager. It didn't. It belonged to me. Filed out of Delaware. 2 signatures on record. One was hers, the other was mine, only under a different name I'd used when we were flipping properties back in 2009. It was almost insulting how easy it had been to stay invisible. The software contract was next. TrackFlow Legal Suite, version 3.1. Sold as a custom billing and case tracking system, praised in some law tech review last year for its intuitive structure. That structure was my cousin's brainchild, and I had funded the whole thing. He gave me 41% equity in exchange for non-interference. I gave him the client, Marla's firm. They'd been using the system for 5 years. Didn't even know I got a quarterly breakdown of user licenses. I pulled 3 empty folders from the bottom drawer, labeled them carefully with a fountain pen, because some things still deserve elegance even now. Folder 1, Ownership Origins. Every deal, every entity, every contract linking me to her professional rise. Not as husband, not as cheerleader, as founder, funder, fixer. Folder 2, Revocation Triggers. Clause language, dates, expiry windows, terms avoidance, the things she never read because they didn't sound romantic. I marked them all with color-coded tabs. Folder 3, Termination Clauses. The fail-safes, the locks I built into each contract in case anything ever went south. Not because I planned this, but because I've seen what people do when they think power is theirs forever. I closed each folder with precision, not rushed, not frenzied, just clinical. She thought I spent my days reading financial blogs and watching reruns of The West Wing. She called it retirement, but I never retired. I just stopped explaining myself to someone who'd already decided she was smarter than me. The truth was, I had been documenting her professional climb for years. Quietly, not for leverage, for protection, theirs initially, then mine. What changed wasn't her success, it was how she began to narrate it, the way my name slowly disappeared from the stories she told at dinner parties, the way I became the homebody, the low-risk partner, the one she joked was married to his filing cabinet. She'd laugh and rub my arm after, I'd smile, but I remembered every punchline. They always start with laughter, these kinds of betrayals. Laughter gives people permission to be cruel while sounding charming. I slid the folders into a leather satchel and locked the clasp, walked over to the desk. There was a single frame photo, me and Marla in Florence the summer before her promotion. I looked so relaxed, like I didn't know the countdown had already started. Behind that frame, taped to the backboard, was the original NDA Marla signed when I first floated the Shell Corporation idea to her during her early startup planning phase, and she laughed then too, called me paranoid. Signed it anyway. That document, still binding, I added it to folder 2. I didn't feel triumphant, not exactly, but I felt something cleaner, sharper, a readiness I hadn't felt in years, the kind of stillness you only get when you finally understand that waiting was never the weak move, it was the strategic one. In war, the patient man doesn't win because he strikes harder. He wins because no one remembers he was holding the knife. The diner off Route 17 hadn't changed in 20 years. Same cracked leather booths, same sticky laminated menus that promised bottomless coffee and lied every damn time. The waitress behind the counter nodded as I came in, recognition without warmth. I used to come here with my brother when he was still alive. Saturday mornings, black coffee, 2 scrambled rye toast. That booth in the corner. Lorna was already seated, reading the business section like it owed her money. Sharp blazer, silver hair coiled back tight, glasses with a chain that somehow made her look more dangerous. She didn't stand when I approached, just looked up, scanned my face, then nodded at the seat across from her. "You look tired," she said flatly. I slid in. "And you look like you just fired someone in your head." She smirked. "3, actually." That was Lorna, my brother's ex-wife. Twice as brilliant as him, half as patient. She'd spent 30 years climbing the HR ladder at one of the biggest multinationals on the East Coast, could spot a fraudulent resume from 10 feet away and tear it apart without breaking a nail. She didn't suffer fools, never had, and once, a long time ago, she'd done Marla a favor. I remember how green she was, Lorna said, as she set her paper down. Eager, pretty, sharp, cold, though, like she was performing warmth, not feeling it. She asked you for help, I said. She begged. I was dating your brother. I told her I didn't do charity, but she kept showing up. I taught her how to interview, how to frame gaps, and she still tried to manipulate me. I pulled the flash drive from my coat pocket and placed it gently between our coffee mugs. I think she forged references. I said, I need to know for sure. You once said you had a hunch. Let's confirm it. Lorna blinked once. Not surprised, just affirmed, like she'd waited for someone to ask. She pulled a slim laptop from her bag, flipped it open, and inserted the drive without a word. A few clicks later, the screen filled with folder names I'd labeled by year. I watched her eyes dart from folder to folder. Then she clicked one, 2007, clerkship application packet. Up popped a PDF, scanned letterhead, perfect formatting, recommendation from Judge Harold Eisner, Southern District Court. I know Eisner, Lorna said immediately. He hates writing letters, only ever vouched for 2 people in 20 years. One was his nephew, the other was the woman he married. She zoomed in, tilted the screen. Signature's wrong. Then she clicked the next one. Letter from Margaret K. Daly, Esquire, my aunt. Dead 12 years. I swallowed, slow and hard. I'd known Margaret had mentored a few young attorneys before her stroke, but Marla never met her, not once. And yet, here it was, a glowing endorsement, dates, details, even a line that claimed Marla brings an intuitive grasp of litigation strategy rare for her age. I felt my jaw tighten. She lifted this from a sample letter template, Lorna said, pointing at the phrasing. I used the same one for a workshop back in '06. I bet she got it from my files. She used my dead aunt, I said quietly, to get into a federal clerkship. She used me to learn how to fake it, and then used your family's ghost to sell it. Lorna clicked a few more times, confirming timestamps matching document properties. The metadata showed creation dates, edit histories. Nothing about these was casual. She knew exactly what she was doing, Lorna muttered. No paper trail, no checks on deceased references. Most places wouldn't have caught it unless someone flagged it. But now? I asked. Now? If someone sends this to a board with proof the references were never verified and one of them's dead, she looked at me. That's not just cause for review, that's grounds for termination, especially in law, especially at her level. She closed the laptop gently, placed her hand over the drive. I'll email you everything, she said. But Elliot, you need to be sure, because once this moves, it doesn't stop. I looked at her, at the lines around her eyes, the years of watching people cheat and lie their way into power, and I realized something. I wasn't angry anymore. Not the kind that clouds judgment. I was clear, cold, yes, but sharp, purposeful. She stood on the bones of people she never even knew, I said, pretended they lifted her when it was me doing it the whole time. She stepped on everyone's back, Lorna replied. Yours, mine, the damn judges. She thought no one would look down long enough to notice the footprints. I nodded, reached for the drive, paused. I'm not doing this for revenge, I said. No, Lorna said. You're doing it because she thought you were a ghost, and you're about to show her you still cast a shadow. I took the flash drive and slid it back into my coat. Outside, the wind had picked up. Clouds thick and low, the kind of sky that told you something was coming. Not a storm, not quite, but change. The past has teeth, especially the parts you pretend no one remembers. The email came in at 6:12 a.m. sharp. Subject line. Contract, clause 14. Highlighted. No greeting, no signature, just a scanned PDF of Marla's original employment agreement and a clean screenshot of the clause in question. Clause 14. Any misrepresentation of past credentials, references, or professional history shall be grounds for immediate suspension, pending a full internal investigation. In the event such misrepresentation was not disclosed to the executive board, the board reserves the right to act without prior warning or consultation. I read it 3 times, slowly,
Then once more, aloud, just to hear how it sounded in my voice. Cold, impersonal, a scalpel dressed up as bureaucracy. I sat back in my chair and stared at the ceiling.
Light from the blinds carved slats across the room, inching over the spines of law books Marla hadn't cracked in years. It was funny how a clause buried in fine print, ignored for over a decade, could now unthread everything she thought was untouchable. I opened my laptop and created a new folder. Trigger package. Private. Inside, I dropped the forged recommendation letters, scanned PDFs, raw metadata files from Lorna, original timestamps dating back to 2007. I added a side-by-side comparison between the Eisner letter and an authentic one from the judge's own clerk. The differences were subtle: signature angle, header formatting, legal phrasing, but to a trained eye, they screamed fraud. Last, I attached the scanned NDA from Marla's early planning days, the one she signed and forgot, the one that bound her to declare any known conflicts of interest or material misstatements made in prior applications. I added a post-it note to the physical copy. She knew. It wasn't personal, it was procedural. And yet, there was a kind of still thrill to it, not joy, not even satisfaction, just balance tipping, a force correcting its own trajectory after years of veering into arrogance. I opened a fresh email. To Private Executive Board Distribution from Anonymous Legal Compliance Monitor. Subject: Urgent Disclosure. 2007 Application Files. Please find attached a series of documents concerning a potential breach of Clause 14 in the employment contract of Marla D. Redacted, currently serving as Redacted. These materials pertain to her original application credentials and may warrant immediate review under internal compliance protocol. Timestamps and authentication metadata are included. This is not a legal accusation, only a compliance flag. Act accordingly. I hovered over the send button. For a second, just a second, I heard her laugh again. That shrill, performative laugh she used at parties when someone made a joke at my expense. Oh, Elliot's just happy if the printer works. He still uses spreadsheets like it's 2003. You know how some men need to feel useful even when they're not? She said it all with love, of course. That brand of public affection that feels like a slap you're supposed to thank her for. I hit send. Delivery confirmed. There was no explosion, no thunderclap, no shadow falling over the house. But I could feel it, like a tremor running beneath the foundation, a silence so dense it buzzed, because that's how real detonation works. It starts quiet, just a whisper in a boardroom, a confused email, a raised eyebrow, and then motion. I picked up the folders: ownership origins, revocation triggers, termination clauses, and slid them back into the leather satchel, this time in reverse order. Termination first. Always start with the end in mind. Then I went to the kitchen, made coffee, French press, no sugar, sat at the counter and watched the sun claw its way over the neighbor's roof. Marla would still be asleep. She'd roll over around 8, check her phone, smile at the likes on her LinkedIn post, probably rewatch a clip from the party, relishing how they toasted her. Then, somewhere around 8:14, her inbox would ping. The subject line would seem harmless at first, maybe boring. Compliance review initiated, attention required. But then she'd open it, see the attachments, the signatures, the letter from a dead woman. And that's when the tide would change. I wasn't waiting for revenge. I wasn't waiting at all. Because the beauty of red tape is that it strangles slowly, quietly, legally, with your own signature tied into the noose. The valet barely glanced at me when I pulled up. Just another aging husband in a charcoal coat with crow's feet and nothing sharp left in his shadow. I handed over the keys, nodded silently, and walked through the revolving door like a ghost that used to live there. The lobby of the Bellwether was loud with clinking glasses and curated jazz, the kind that pretends to be background music but practically shouts over conversations. The sign near the elevators read, Private Event, Level 16, Harper and Wren Acquisition Toast. They made her name smaller, probably some intern's oversight, or maybe even they'd started shrinking her already. The elevator opened on a room full of teeth. Everyone was glowing, not drunk yet, but buzzing on the kind of professional intoxication that only multi-million-dollar deals and too much self-congratulation can bring. Laughter moved in waves. Waiters passed truffled canapes no one actually ate. And at the center of it all was Marla, draped in forest green, glass raised like a chalice, surrounded by people who mistook proximity for power. She hadn't seen me yet. I stayed just outside the spotlight, watched her work the room like a politician who'd already decided your vote didn't matter but would smile anyway. The practiced tilt of her head, the half-second pause before responding to a compliment like she was deciding whether to accept it or pretend humility. Then her eyes landed on me. A flash of recognition. A pause. Her lips curled, not in surprise, but amusement. "You actually showed," she said, as she wove through the crowd toward me. Her perfume hit before she did, sharp, sweet, overconfident. "I won't stay long," I said, my voice flat. She leaned in close like we were sharing an inside joke. "Try not to embarrass me." I tilted my head, studied her for a moment like I was trying to remember a detail I'd forgotten, then smiled, just barely. "You've handled that part yourself," I said. She didn't reply, just turned away and walked back into the crowd, hips swinging like punctuation. The people around her welcomed her return, like she'd just gone to powder her crown. I slipped out through the terrace doors. The night air was cool, cleaner than the recycled vanity inside. I stepped to the edge, looked down 16 stories to the quiet street below. Cars rolled past like they had somewhere better to be. I took out my phone. No fumbling, no hesitation. Dialed. The voice answered immediately. "Already parked." I nodded to no one. "She's mid-toast. Give it 3 minutes." A brief chuckle on the other end. Classic timing. "Clean," I said. "No shouting, no spectacle." "You don't pay me to shout," the voice said, and the line went dead. I slipped the phone back into my pocket, looked up at the skyline like I had all the time in the world, because tonight I did. Back inside, I could see her through the glass, laughing again. A man in a navy suit leaned in and whispered something in her ear that made her throw her head back. One hand rested on his chest for a second too long, the same hand she used to reach for mine, back when she thought it meant something. This was the party she'd been waiting for, her victory lap. She'd called it our arrival last week, though I couldn't quite remember what "we" she was referring to anymore. I tapped the railing once. The clock had started, 16 stories up, and she hadn't felt it yet. But the floor beneath her was shifting, not collapsing, not yet. That would be too generous. No, this was better. This was gravity doing its work. Quiet, unseen. I was just the one who loosened the screws. To independence, to power, and to knowing your worth. Her voice rang out, crystalline, soaked in self-congratulation and expensive Pinot. Marla stood at the center of the room, framed by the floor-to-ceiling windows like she'd been placed there by design. Her glass raised, her teeth gleaming in that too-practiced smile. And that's when it hit. Ding! Elevator doors slid open behind her, the clean, mechanical whisper of consequence. Every head didn't turn at once. It took a breath, a beat, then movement. A subtle shift in the room's temperature. Some attendees blinked in confusion. Others froze mid-sip. Daniel stepped through, trench coat still buttoned, like he hadn't bothered to pretend he was here to celebrate. His eyes scanned the room once, dismissed everyone but her, and locked on. He crossed the space in 10 strides. Marla's smile faltered, just a flicker. Then he grabbed her arm. "What did you do?" Daniel barked. Silence fell like a guillotine. Marla's champagne flute trembled slightly. "Daniel, what are you—" He didn't let go, didn't yell either. He held up a tablet, the screen facing her, glowing with the unmistakable layout of an email client. One word in the subject line screamed louder than he ever could. Urgent. Underneath it, just visible. 2007 application files, compliance violation. Immediate action required. Marla's mouth opened, but no words came out. A slow, confused smile crossed her face like she thought maybe this was a joke. A roast, perhaps. The pinnacle of workplace camaraderie. "Is this some kind of—" "You forged federal references," Daniel said, low and furious. "One of them is dead, Marla. The other denies ever meeting you." Her champagne glass tilted in her hand. She didn't even notice. The room remained frozen. Only one waiter dared to move, stepping slowly backward, eyes locked on the floor. The CFO, Harold something, the one who always tried to flirt with her after 2 bourbons, took a silent step away and loosened his tie. "Wait," Marla said, trying for control, her voice an octave too high. "Daniel, I think there's a mistake. I don't even remember who—" "What judge?" "Judge Eisner," he snapped, "who has never written a recommendation in his life, and when asked earlier today, referred to your application as laughably fabricated." Gasps were stifled. Nobody moved. Daniel turned the tablet toward the room now. "This isn't a rumor. This isn't a scandal. It's fraud. You built your career on falsified credentials." A young associate in the back involuntarily whispered, "Holy sh—" Marla stepped back, or tried to, but he still held her wrist, firmly, not forcefully, like he was keeping her from floating away on lies. I can explain," she said, voice now cracking. I don't know how this, maybe it was someone else, my assistant, years ago." Elliot stepped into the doorway. No one noticed at first. His silhouette was just part of the architecture, quiet, unobtrusive, forgettable, until Marla saw him. Her eyes met his across the room, and for a brief, unbearable second, she looked truly afraid, not of Daniel, not of the board, but of him. She opened her mouth again, but whatever came next died in her throat. Elliot didn't move, didn't blink. His face was unreadable, stoic, unmoved, a mask of still water hiding everything beneath. But inside, the click had already happened. The detonation was done. He didn't need to raise his voice. The room was already rubble. Daniel finally let go of her wrist. "You'll be contacted by internal counsel in the morning. Don't come into the office." "Wait," Marla said again. "Please, we can talk about this. There's context." He shook his head. "There's metadata." And then he walked out, past the gasping interns, the retreating CFO, the photographers lowering their cameras, past Elliot, with a glance that said everything. "This was yours. She did this. But you buried it perfectly." Elliot stepped back into the shadows. Marla stood alone, the party still technically in progress, the music still playing, but no one clinked glasses, no one laughed, and her glass, still in her hand, finally tipped, shattered. Daniel didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The silence in the room was so thick his words cut through it like a scalpel through gauze. "Clause 14, he said slowly, deliberately, addressing the frozen cluster of suits and wine glasses before him, "allows us to suspend any employee, executive or not, pending internal investigation in the case of a confirmed misrepresentation of credentials or history." His eyes swept the crowd, letting the words sink in. Then they landed on her. "Effective immediately, Marla." She opened her mouth, still playing for dignity maybe, still hoping for the room's loyalty to snap back like a rubber band. But this wasn't a room anymore. It was an audience. And no one wanted to be seen applauding the wrong act. "You'll be contacted by legal," Daniel added. 2 people stepped forward from the crowd, neither in security uniforms, but both unmistakably summoned. Quiet, clean-cut, clipboard in hand. 1 man, 1 woman. Professional smile, professional silence. They flanked her without touching. Marla's face tried to hold the same angle it wore during interviews and cover shoots, but her lips trembled, her chin pulled up once, twice. Her eyes darted to familiar faces. No one met her gaze. The woman escort spoke softly. "If you'd come with us, Ms. Dalton." For a second I thought she'd refuse, but she didn't. She walked, not toward the elevators, not through the front. They took her out the side door. The room, now half full, exhaled, or maybe it deflated. Someone muttered something about the valet, someone else spilled a drink and didn't bother to clean it. The air felt like post-fire haze, still warm but empty. I followed Daniel out. He didn't say anything until we were past the double doors and out on the terrace again. No audience. Just the sound of traffic humming below and the wind pressing against his coat. He turned when I approached, eyes flicking to the envelope in my hand. "This is yours," I said, holding it out. He took it. "All of it?" "Original licenses, founding documents, the back-end ownership contracts for the billing system, the lease guarantee, every dotted I." I paused. She never looked behind the curtain. Just memorize the lines. He flipped through the first few pages, scanning the headings like a man who already knew what they contained. She never once questioned how we funded the Charleston office, he said, or how we got track flow at a 50% enterprise rate. She just assumed someone else made it happen. She was right, I said. Daniel closed the folder. We'll audit everything. Quietly. Do it quietly, do it clean, I said, but don't cover for her. He looked up, more curious than surprised. You sure you don't want a seat at the table when it's done? I was never after a seat, I said. Just wanted her to know the table wasn't hers. He gave a slow, appreciative nod, then lowered his voice. This building, he said, nodding up at the lights above us. It's still under that holding company of yours, right? Calton Sierra Partners? I smiled faintly. Not for long. He raised an eyebrow. I filed the sale paperwork this morning, I said. Closing by end of quarter. She'll lose the office suite lease by default. No extension clause. She buried the option in an unread appendix. Daniel laughed. You really did build the floor beneath her. I did, I said, and now I'm reclaiming the wood. He tucked the folder under his arm and extended a hand. You know, he said, you always struck me as quiet, maybe even soft. I am quiet, I replied. Soft's a matter of perspective. He nodded once more, turned and disappeared into the building. I stayed there a moment longer, looking up. 16 stories of glass, ego, and pretense. Marla used to say, it looked like it touched the sky. I knew better. It only ever touched what I let it stand on. The door slammed hard enough to shake the picture frames in the hallway. A coat hit the floor, then heels, then a voice, shaking, venom-laced, loud enough to rattle the damn glass. You humiliated me. I didn't get up. I was at the kitchen table, still in the same spot I'd returned to 3 hours ago. The lights were low. One lamp above me cast shadows long enough to make the house feel cavernous. My laptop was closed. A manila folder lay beside a single glass of scotch I hadn't touched. Marla stormed into view like a hurricane that hadn't realized it was already downgraded to a breeze. Do you have any idea what you've done? She spat. You think this makes you some kind of, what, hero? You sabotaged everything I worked for, my firm, my name. I didn't look up right away, just straightened the corner of the folder with one finger. You called me useless, I said finally, in front of your co-workers, our friends. At a party you built with my money, using software I funded, in a building I still own, though not for much longer. She blinked, just once. Processing. I built that firm, she snapped. You just helped. You made introductions. Fine. But I did the work. I looked at her now, not with anger, not even with judgment, just stillness. You've been standing on my shoulder so long you forgot they were there. Her breath caught, not in pain, in offense, like the idea of owing me anything was a personal insult. I opened the drawer beside me, pulled out a second folder. Black, slim, tidy. Inside, signed divorce papers, asset reassignment, irrevocable trust amendments, revocation letters for every LLC and holding company tied to her career, all notarized, all dated before the party. She stared at it like it was a dead animal. I'm not doing this to punish you, I said. I'm doing it because it's done. She didn't move. You said you could drop me any time, I added. Then I slid the pen across the table. I just saved you the trouble. For the first time since she'd walked in, she didn't speak. Her face went flat, not sad, not sorry, just calculating. She was already scanning for leverage, for escape hatches, for ways to spin this into sympathy or legal maneuvering. But there weren't any. I'd pulled every string before she even realized she was tangled in them. She glanced down at the pen, her hand twitched. She didn't pick it up. You think this makes you strong? She whispered. You think silence makes you powerful? No, I said, but it made me invisible long enough to finish the job. And then I stood, not fast, not dramatic, just enough to shift the weight of the moment back into the room. I left the papers there, left her standing in a house she no longer owned, facing a future she no longer controlled, and a man she could no longer narrate into irrelevance. As I walked past her, she reached out, reflex, not emotion. I paused just long enough to let her fingers miss. Then I walked down the hall and didn't look back. Marla hadn't moved in 10 minutes. She just stood there, barefoot now, one hand on the back of the chair I used to sit in every morning. Her other hand rested on the folder I'd left open, divorce papers on one side, revocations on the other, like bookends to a story she thought she was still writing. Then, from the counter, her phone buzzed. She didn't look at it right away. Maybe part of her still believed that if she didn't check, it wouldn't be real. That all of this, the boardroom fallout, the stunned silence of her peers, the firm unraveling thread by thread, was just a bad dream dressed in tailored reality. But curiosity wins where pride falters. She picked it up. One notification. From Elliot Thomas. Subject. Revocation. Immediate effect. She tapped it open. Her thumb froze mid-scroll. 3 attachments. First, a PDF of her lease termination. Office Suite 1602. Building ownership reassigned as of 9:01 a.m. that morning. Immediate termination clause enforced. Locks changed. Badge access revoked. Second, a screenshot from TrackFlow Legal Suite. Her user ID, marla.dalton, harperin.com. Status, access revoked. Permanent timestamp, today, 7 p.m. The third attachment was an image, a still from the rooftop party. She was mid-laugh, champagne in hand, head tilted, flanked by smiling coworkers. The exact moment she'd said it, "I can drop him anytime, he's useless." Across the top of the photo, written in clean serif font, "Arrogance is loud, ownership is silent." Her fingers trembled. The phone slipped from her hand, hit the hardwood with a sharp crack that echoed louder than it should have. She looked up. Elliot stood at the end of the hallway, already wearing his coat, one hand on the door handle. He hadn't stormed out. He hadn't yelled. He didn't even look angry. He looked finished. She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Not a plea, not an insult, not even a demand, because there was nothing left to ask for, nothing left to twist. He walked to the door, opened it, and stepped into the night. No glance back, no words, just the hush of footsteps on stone and the muted click of a door closing behind him. Soft, final, absolute. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was complete. The sound of a man who no longer needed to raise his voice to be heard. The sound of a chapter ending without permission. The sound of ownership leaving the room.